The February 2025 Trump-Putin summit in Alaska echoed a largely forgotten chapter of history. The 1867 Alaska Purchase, when Secretary of State William Seward acquired the territory from Russia for $7.2 million. A deal once mocked as Seward's folly that secured America's Arctic frontier and fundamentally altered the balance of power in the North Pacific. The historical parallels run deeper than location. Just as 19th century imperial powers competed for Arctic territories during the age of polar exploration, the early 21st century saw a renewed great game for Arctic resources. Russia planted its flag on the North Pole seabed in 2007, while China declared itself a near-Arctic state in 2018. Moves that resurrected centuries-old patterns of great power competition. Declassified Cold War documents reveal that, since the 1970s, both American and Soviet military planners identified the Arctic as the next great resource battleground. The 2025 Alaska Summit represented the culmination of this long-gestating geopolitical contest. The summit's Arctic Energy Partnership mirrored historical resource pacts that reshaped global politics, from the 1928 Red Line Agreement that divided Middle Eastern oil between Western powers to the 1975 Helsinki Accords that formalized spheres of influence. By granting American companies access to Russian Arctic oil fields while Russia agreed to reduce energy exports to China, the deal established a resource condominium reminiscent of the 19th century colonial arrangements that divided Africa and Asia among European powers. The market response, energy stocks surging 17% in a single day, paralleled the London stock market boom, following Britain's 1875 Suez Canal acquisition, which similarly realigned global trade routes overnight and caught rival powers by surprise. The Ukraine peace plan, emerging from the summit, followed historical precedents of great power compromise at the expense of smaller nations. Like the 1938 Munich Agreement that surrendered parts of Czechoslovakia to Nazi Germany, or the 1945 Yalta Conference that determined Eastern Europe's fate, the 2025 framework prioritized great power interests over Ukrainian sovereignty. Russia's withdrawal from specific eastern territories in exchange for Ukraine's neutrality echoed Finland's Cold War Finlandization, a historical compromise where smaller states maintained nominal independence while deferring to neighboring powers on security matters. The 25-year Special Administrative Region status for Crimea paralleled Hong Kong's 1997 handover to China, a transitional arrangement allowing continued Russian control while avoiding formal Western recognition, just as Britain formally transferred Hong Kong while preserving its distinct system temporarily. The summit's marginalization of China repeated a pattern seen throughout Chinese history. Just as the 19th century, unequal treaties excluded China from decisions about its own resources and trade, the Alaska Summit effectively locked China out of Arctic development without Chinese representation. Beijing's aggressive response, accelerating nuclear energy development and increasing South China Sea activity, mirrored China's historical pattern of asserting power in its traditional sphere when excluded from broader international arrangements, from the 1900 Boxer Rebellion to the 1996 Taiwan Strait Crisis. This continued the centuries-old dynamic of major powers alternately engaging with and containing China, dating back to Lord Macartney's 1793 mission to Beijing, through Nixon's 1972 opening to China. The new global architecture, established by the Alaska Summit, followed historical patterns of resource-based realignments. Just as Britain's transition from coal to oil necessitated new Middle Eastern partnerships in the early 20th century, America's energy revolution enabled a strategic pivot away from traditional Middle Eastern alliances. The European reaction, simultaneous defense spending increases, and energy cooperation with the US-Russia partnership echoed Europe's historical balancing behavior, from the 19th century Concert of Europe to Cold War détente. As former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger noted, the summit represented the most significant restructuring of global power dynamics since the opening to China in the 1970s, itself a historical pivot based on changing geopolitical calculations rather than ideological alignment. The political realignment in Washington followed a pattern seen throughout American history during major foreign policy shifts. Just as the 1919 Treaty of Versailles split both parties along new lines, or the 1947 Truman Doctrine realigned congressional coalitions, the Alaska Summit created unusual political bedfellows across partisan lines. European fissures mirrored historical divisions dating back to the 1956 Suez Crisis, when British and French interventionism clashed with American diplomatic approaches. French President Marine Le Pen's support for a European-Russian security framework represented the latest iteration of France's historical pursuit of independent foreign policy dating to de Gaulle's 1966 withdrawal from NATO's military command. Throughout history, control of key resources has determined geopolitical primacy more consistently than ideology. From Venetian control of Mediterranean salt trade to British domination of global coal shipping, resource leverage has translated directly into diplomatic power. The Alaska Summit continued this historical pattern, while adding a climate dimension unprecedented in diplomatic history. As climate scientist Dr. Jennifer Francis observed, while previous resource competitions focused on exploiting existing accessible assets, this new Arctic competition centers on resources becoming accessible precisely because of climate change, a historical irony of profound proportions. Like the 15th century Treaty of Tordesillas that divided newly discovered territories between Spain and Portugal, the 2025 Arctic Arrangement sought to establish resource claims before technological capabilities fully enabled exploitation. The Alaska Summit represents a return to historical patterns of great power politics after the ideological interlude of the Cold War. Like previous diplomatic inflection points, the 1815 Congress of Vienna, the 1885 Berlin Conference, or the 1945 Yalta Agreement, its significance lies not in specific policy details, but in establishing new rules for international competition. Whether history judges this new architecture as stable as the concert of Europe, or as volatile as the pre-World War I alliance system remains to be seen. What's certain is that the Arctic has emerged as the 21st century's geopolitical center, following historical patterns where technological change repeatedly shifts the geographic focus of great power competition. What historical precedents do you see in this new chapter of Arctic diplomacy? Share your insights below.